During the last year, the Japanese army proved to its adversaries that it was an unstoppable behemoth, defeating the British, American, Dutch, Indian and Australian forces at every place they managed to advance on. But in the last week, their so-called invincibility was finally debunked with the defeat of the Ichiki Detachment at Alligator Creek. Yet the conclusion of the Battle of Tenaru also harboured the start of a new phase for the Guadalcanal Campaign, a period in which the Marines and the US Navy were going to be challenged by some of the best forces of the Japanese Empire. Join us as we cover the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, as well as new developments in the new Guinea Campaign, with the start of the invasion of Milne Bay. There's one other invasion you need to stay informed about: invasions of privacy. Yes, on the internet you're open to attack all the time, but there are ways to out-tech your opponents in this regard to remain afloat, and of course we're talking about NordVPN. They let you direct your internet traffic through extremely fast servers all over the world with a single click. This masks your location and encrypts your data to prevent ISPs and trackers from compiling and selling your digital footprint, and it avoids any throttling of download speeds. Or for high security needs, use their double VPN with double the encryption. Add in their new threat protection features and you'll be locked down even safer. Aside from safety though, you can use one of over 5,400 servers in 59 countries to access region-locked content, such as TV shows, movies, games, or even to get different prices on the same items. And it's really easy to do. One click and the internet is yours to use worry-free. You get protection on 6 devices, so you can secure your phones and laptops when away from home at no extra cost. Plus, tests have shown NordVPN to be the fastest provider out there. You can get a massive discount at nordvpn.com/kingsandgenerals, and you also get a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk trying it out. Back on August 7th, Operation Watchtower began with marine landings on Guadalcanal, Tulagi and its neighbouring islands. During these initial days of fighting, the Marines were supported by the air cover of a carrier force that was formed around the carriers Enterprise, Saratoga and Wasp, under the overall command of Admiral Fletcher. Feeling like his vessels were too exposed against Japanese land-based air attacks after the destruction of the Elliott, Fletcher decided to withdraw on the evening of August 8th, directing his carriers to the southwest to guard the major Allied bases of Noumea and Espiritu Santo, and then to cover the delivery of aircraft to the recently finished Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. After the Battle of the Tenaru, however, Fletcher would be ordered to concentrate in the waters southeast of the Solomons to prevent more Japanese reinforcements from landing. Meanwhile, Admiral Mikawa and General Hyakutake worked tirelessly to turn the situation around at Guadalcanal. After their tremendous victory at Savo, the Japanese believed the Marines to be withdrawing from Guadalcanal, so they had decided to send a small detachment to reinforce the Japanese garrison there and recapture the lost airstrip. On August 21st, the Ichiki Detachment would be subsequently decimated in the Battle of the Tenaru, but this was only the first reinforcement group of many more to come during the execution of Operation Ka. The remaining 1,100 soldiers from the 28th Regiment, along with some 400 SNLF Marines, were already prepared to be transported by Admiral Tanaka's escorting force, yet the Japanese would decide to wait until the arrival of a major naval force from the combined fleet. These vessels had been undergoing upkeep, repair and training after the disastrous Battle of Midway, as Admiral Yamamoto had learned valuable lessons from that defeat. The most remarkable was the relegation of the battleships as the main component of the fleet, with the aircraft carriers at last taking their place. Other changes included the reorganization of the combined fleet that we've already covered, and the reshuffling of aircraft complements for the carriers. Yamamoto hoped to enjoy ample time for these changes to be implemented, but the unexpected American offensive in the Solomons now forced him to rush the new 2nd and 3rd Fleets towards the South Pacific, where they were going to receive their baptism of fire. On the morning of August 21st, the fleets of Admirals Nagumo and Kondo would rendezvous at sea and then split again to head south separately. One day later, Admiral Tanaka would begin transportation of the new reinforcements towards Guadalcanal without any air support, as the Japanese carriers were more concerned over the destruction of Fletcher's carriers to the southeast than to protect the convoy. In that regard, the Japanese launched reconnaissance missions towards the southern Solomons, hoping to locate the American carriers, but instead discovering the troubling news that there were American planes now at Henderson Field. In the meantime, the destroyer Kawakaze intercepted a supply convoy on August 22nd and managed to torpedo the destroyer Blue, forcing the Americans to eventually scuttle the ship. Meanwhile, American intelligence believed Nagamo's carriers to be in home waters, yet there were increasing reports of a possible Japanese counteroffensive unfolding. Preemptively, Fletcher's carriers thus continued to cast 200-mile-long nets of search planes into the area, with Admiral McCain's land-based aircraft doing the same. On the morning of August 23rd, a PBY would finally discover Tanaka's convoy 250 miles north of Guadalcanal, so Fletcher would immediately send forward Saratoga's strike group, led by Commander Harry Felt. Luckily for the Japanese, the Americans ran into sullen grey clouds and rain squalls and would have to retreat towards Guadalcanal due to the bad weather. Yet Tanaka didn't want to force his luck either, so he decided to turn back as well. Despite the sighting of Tanaka's convoy, Fletcher didn't believe that a battle was imminent, so in the afternoon he decided to detach the Wasp group for refueling, leaving him with only 2 carriers for the incoming battle. During the night, while the Saratoga airmen manually refueled their planes on Guadalcanal after their failed strike, and the destroyer Kagero swept the Savo Sound and fired at the Marines on the beaches, Tanaka decided to once again change course for Guadalcanal, with Rear Admiral Hara Chuichi being detached in command of the light carrier Ryujo to protect his convoy and launch a strike over Guadalcanal. At 0600 on August 24th, Nagamo set course 150 degrees south with Kondo's advance force guarding its eastern flank in case of an encounter with the Americans, and with Rear Admiral Abe Hiroaki's vanguard force in a line 6 miles in front of the carriers. In the meantime, the Americans continued to conduct search patrols, and at 9:35 a PBY would sight Ryujo and alert Fletcher of the sighting. The Admiral, however, was skeptical about the reports and also had no aircraft, with Felt's group arriving at the carrier only by midday, at which point Fletcher ordered his carrier force to swing in a northerly direction to close range on the Ryujo. Meanwhile, Ryujo would launch its Guadalcanal strike at 12:20, sending 21 aircraft under Lieutenant Notomi Kenjiro towards Henderson Field. The Japanese pilots would then engage 18 American planes on top of Guadalcanal at 14:20, resulting in a very ineffective bombing, with 3 Wildcats, 3 Zeros and 3 Kates getting shot down. Yet the reports of the attack now confirmed to Fletcher that the Ryujo report was true, although he didn't know if other enemy carriers were in the area. Nonetheless, with hesitation, he ordered the Saratoga strike group to lift off by 1400 hours. At the same time, Fletcher's carriers were finally discovered by a Japanese float plane, so Nagamo dispatched a 37-aircraft strike force under Lieutenant Commander Seki Mamoru, while Admiral Abe began to accelerate to close in on the Americans. At 1600, a second attack group of 36 planes, led by Lieutenant Takahashi Sadamu, took off as Nagamo directed his carriers eastwards to avoid a counterattack, although 7 B-17s would manage to find him, conducting a very ineffective bombing over his carriers later that day. With Felt already on his way towards Ryujo, reports from the Enterprise began to arrive, with some of its SPDs detecting Nagamo's vessels and bombing the heavy cruiser Maya by 1300. This left Fletcher in a precarious position as he was exposed while his main force was attacking a secondary objective. At 1550, Felt's strike began poorly, with Ryujo successfully dodging more than 10 bombs, but in the end, the light carrier would be hit by 3 bombs and 1 torpedo as the Americans pressed their attack. The crippled Ryujo would later sink during the night, and Notomi's group would have to ditch their planes around it. Also, Tanaka's convoy had to turn west to avoid any attacks. Concurrent to the loss of Ryujo, the radars of Enterprise detected the incoming wave of enemy aircraft, so Fletcher launched 53 Wildcats for combat air patrol. Approaching from the north, at a higher altitude than the defending fighters, Seki divided his force into two groups to attack both cruisers, yet his planes would be immediately engaged by the Wildcats, and in the confusion, they would end up attacking only the Enterprise by 1645. At a cost of 17 vals and 3 zeros, the Japanese managed to score 3 hits over the carrier in less than 15 minutes, and they also shot down 8 Wildcats in the engagement. Yet the damage inflicted on Enterprise, although heavy, wasn't critical. Luckily for the Americans, the Japanese second wave that could have finished off Enterprise had aimed for an erroneous estimated position, passing 50 miles astern of the carrier force, then swinging east on an interception course, and finally turning north at 1827 before disappearing into the distance. Before the first attack, Fletcher had also launched some 25 planes to counterattack the enemy, yet they would only find the seaplane tender Chitose at 1735, scoring 2 near misses that caused flooding and a list. By 1900, the battle was over, ending inconclusively as Fletcher headed southeast away from the battle area, and as Nagamo decided to lead his carriers north to refuel instead of pressing the attack. With the destruction of 1 enemy light carrier and 75 aircraft against the loss of only 20 aircraft, the third carrier duel of the war is definitely considered an American tactical victory, but this wasn't the end of the action. With midnight approaching, Tanaka was once again ordered to head south and land his 1,500 men on Guadalcanal, while 3 destroyers were sent to shell the beaches as a diversion. The following day, however, the Japanese convoy would be attacked by Marine and Navy dive bombers, resulting in the Jinsu getting damaged, the transport Kinryu Maru and the destroyer Mitsuki getting destroyed, and then the shaken Tanaka ordering the final withdrawal to the northwest. The landings had at last been stopped, so the Marines could sigh in relief. But this wasn't the end of Operation Ka. This only meant that Mikawa would have to seek alternative means to land reinforcements for his stranded forces at Guadalcanal. In the meantime, we'll turn to the New Guinea theatre, where new threats for Port Moresby were going to materialize. Already worried about the Japanese thrust through the Kokoda Track, General Blamey had been preparing the 2-division 1st Australian Corps of Lieutenant General Sidney Rowell to land on New Guinea and take command of the defence of Port Moresby. On August 12th, while Rowell was replacing General Norris as commander of the New Guinea force, Brigadier Selwyn Porter of the 30th Brigade was ordered to take command of the Marobra force, getting reinforced with troops from the 53rd Battalion. During Porter's brief command, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Honor would be appointed to lead the 39th Battalion, and would fight a series of minor skirmishes against the Japanese at Isurava. On August 23rd, Porter would finally hand over command of the Marobra force to Brigadier Arnold Potts, who would immediately prepare to face and stop the Japanese advance as he awaited for his 21st Brigade to arrive at Isurava. Meanwhile, General Hyakutake continued his plans to land the South Seas Detachment of General Hori and the 41st Regiment of Colonel Yazawa Kiyomi in the Bunogona area, and to launch an amphibious invasion of Milne Bay with the Kawaguchi Detachment, aiming to support the overland drive on Port Moresby with it. Although the first echelons of Horii and Yazawa's men had successfully landed on New Guinea on August 21st, Hyakutake's plans for Milne Bay would have to change, because as we've seen, the Kawaguchi detachment was redirected to take part in Operation Ka. Instead, the control of Operation RE was handed over to Admiral Mikawa and his 8th Fleet, who appointed some 950 SNLF Marines under Commander Hayashi Masajiro, 2 Hago tanks and a further 450 Navy units to conduct the amphibious invasion. As for the Americans, they had landed the 7th Australian Brigade of Brigadier John Field back on July 11th, when MacArthur had ordered the construction of an airbase at Rabi. By August, the airfield had almost been completed, and the Milne force was reinforced with the 18th Australian Brigade in anticipation of an expected attack. Major General Cyril Claus took over command of the defense of Milne Bay on August 12th, and by the 28th, his forces would total some 4,500 infantry and around 4,300 construction personnel. On the morning of August 24th, amidst a preparatory air bombing of the Australian positions, the main invasion force departed Rabaul, covered by a small fleet under the command of Rear Admiral Matsuyama Mitsuharu. During the afternoon, Matsuyama's convoy was spotted by Australian coast watchers, yet the defenders could not employ their aircraft against the invaders due to bad weather. At the same time, Commander Tsukioka Torishige's 350 SNLF Marines, coming from Buna, were spotted as they quickly landed at Goodenough Island to rest, yet Australian Kitty Hawks would go on to strafe their barges and leave them stranded on the island. On August 25th, as the Japanese continued to advance unmolested, Claus ordered some of his dispersed forces in the east to concentrate around Rabi, although these would soon meet the enemy as they retreated. At 22:30, Hiyashi's men finally landed near Wagga Wagga, rapidly establishing a beachhead and skirmishing with Australian patrols to the west, while being harassed by Kitty Hawks in the landing area, something that would force the invaders to move only by night. The next morning, however, the Japanese began their advance in force, soon finding in the afternoon that an Australian company had repelled their advance party. Despite the tenacity of the defenders, heavy fire and the tanks would eventually force them to withdraw towards Motio, where they were to be reinforced by elements of the 25th and 61st Battalions. Arriving at the creek, the Australians tried to establish a defensive position, yet the Japanese followed closely behind them and harassed their rear elements. During the night, Hiyashi decided to launch a savage assault, supported by surface fire from Matsuyama's vessels. Confusing fighting ensued, lit only by moonlight, but despite their resistance, the Australian forward positions were becoming untenable. During the early hours of August 27th, Hiyashi also sent some Marines around the Australian positions while shouting in English orders to retreat. Some 50 defenders would be deceived by this ruse, withdrawing to Gili Gili, while the Japanese continued to outflank the rest of them. At 04:30, the weary Australians finally had to retreat towards the Gamma River, soon being relieved there by the 2nd 10th Battalion as they pulled back towards Gili Gili. Yet the newly arrived battalion continued its advance further east, where they would engage the Japanese tanks around 2000 hours. Pressed by the enemy and unable to disable the tanks, the Australians suffered heavy casualties, but managed to repel 4 subsequent assaults. By midnight, however, the Japanese had infiltrated their positions, and in the confusion, the defenders would have to retreat in disorder towards Gamma. By 0200 on August 28th, the Australians had reached the river at scattered positions, yet the Japanese followed in hot pursuit and soon penetrated their defensive line, thus forcing the remainder of the battalion to withdraw further west in desperation towards Gili Gili. With the enemy continuing its advance, Field and Claus decided to then deploy the 25th Battalion between Rabi and Kilabo to defend the incomplete airfield. Luckily for them, the airfield would prove a perfect defensive position that could neutralize the Japanese tanks, as they would get stuck in the mud, preventing them from participating in further assaults. In the early hours of August 28th, the Japanese would commence their assault of the well-defended Australian positions, yet the airstrip offered a wide and clear field of fire that aided the 25th Battalion in repelling the enemy. Soon they would be reinforced with the 61st Battalion, and would be further supported by Kitty Hawks from the air, finally forcing the invaders to retreat east of Rabi. During this battle, Claus thought to be fighting an invasion force of 5,000 soldiers, but instead they were fighting a numerically inferior force of brave and determined men, whose plan of attack, centering on the use of their 2 tanks, worked wonders. But this was not to last, as the Australians were now preparing for their own counter-offensive. Next week, however, we'll turn back to the Kokoda track, where the Japanese were preparing to resume their advance in full strength. To see that and more, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.